Welcome to the Ignited Recovery Podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because Ignited Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Adi Jaffe, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero? Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Ignited Recovery Secrets podcast. I'm Adi Jaffe, and I'm so happy to bring you today Shannon Algeo. We've had him on this podcast before. He's such a dear friend. If you got to go to up until now, the only live Glow Ignited event because COVID hit in the middle of all this, you would have seen Shannon be on that stage. An incredible man. Trust Your Truth is the name of the book. And we talk a lot about how do you even identify what your truth is, and then how do you build a life centered around that truth. If you know anything about what we preach here at Ignited, what I preach at Ignited, and the work that I do with the clients, it's always about finding that, right? Finding the core of who you are, and then igniting it, getting it on fire, finding your purpose, moving forward in life in a way that really, really serves you. Shannon is a master around meditation, mindfulness practices, and hearing him through personal stories talk about how he found his truth and how he's followed it since. It's just awe-inspiring, and you're going to love it. So stick with us. You're going to absolutely adore this. Go get Shannon's book. See you on the other side. Just talking about this in one of my groups yesterday. We have to figure out how to function no matter what's happening around us, because that whole I'll be happy when, I'll have my shit together when, as soon as everything here works out, I will then be able to work out, right? That whole concept, we always knew it left you at the mercy of the rest of the world, but it's never been as clear as it is right now. If in March of 2020, you thought to yourself, oh, well, when this blows over, I'll get my shit together, then 2020 was a really shitty year for you. 2021 is not going to be any better. And it's up to us to figure out, when you're talking about this concept of like trusting your truth, it's in you. It's always been in you. It's always going to be in you, no matter what's happening in the outside world, outside your home, outside your head, outside your country, outside your fill-in, whatever group you want to bring yourself into. Your version of the truth of your reality that will make you the best you that you can be is all here.
Totally. Yeah. I had this aha moment of sorts because I spent most of December, pretty much all of December in Delaware, Maryland with my family, like quarantined to protect my parents, and then got tested and then went and stayed with them for the holidays. And I got back to LA like the first week of January, and things in LA are still now, but then they were like really dire. So it was really intense coming from a pretty chill, like rural Delaware area where things are pretty calm with COVID, to the intensity of LA being like, oh, like, I hope I don't need to go to the hospital because I won't be able to. And like that kind of thought process. And I had this awareness. I had this like visual of, it's like we are on a ship going away from the coastline, and all of 2020, we could look back and see what was behind us, and we could still see the coast. We could still see the land. And then something, at least for me, around the riots at the Capitol and the insurrection and the new year, even separate from that, I realized I can't see behind me anymore. It's like I can't see the land. And really now we are like voyaging forward into the abyss of the unknown. And it really does feel like we are in a state of collective becoming, like emergence, like we are moving into something that is unknown, and there really isn't a back to normal.
Yeah.
there's not this back to normal. And I think for some of us, we like what you brought up earlier, these like, how are we coping? Like, what are our coping mechanisms? Some of those coping mechanisms are conscious, like maybe like working out or meditation or journaling, eating well, sleeping well, these practices that we have to sort of stay sane. But there is no back to normal. There's no going back. And it's like there never was. Like life is always changing and transforming and growing. And I think that that's, I mean, that's why I wrote Trust Your Truth, was that life is going to hand us, you know, whatever cards are going to be dealt, and we can't always control that. And so how do we awaken? How do we learn from the lessons of life and live our unique truth and existence despite the challenging experiences that get thrown our way?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And so I haven't even introed you yet. Everybody
Oh, hi.
listening right now, this is Shannon Algeo, a dear, dear friend. Man, I miss the days when you spoke at Glow,
Oh my
and we
gosh.
got to get together in person. Um, but you know, Shannon is somebody who's, again, as I just mentioned, not only spoke and has been on the Ignited podcast before, but also has worked with some of our elite clients at Ignited and has really been an integral part of everything that we do. So it's so beautiful and amazing to have you back on here, Shannon, and welcome.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. Yeah, I miss being in person with you in large groups and
Oh,
sitting outside and having dinner in Culver City with people from all over the world.
how
Like,
fun
I
was
can't wait till
that?
we can do that again.
Cannot wait. Cannot wait. And right, we're talking about this concept of, in the face of anything that happens on the outside, how do you trust your truth? How do you connect to yourself? And so let's just start at the beginning. How did you learn? How did you start understanding? And then how did you cultivate this ability, this need to trust your gut, to trust your inner intuition into guiding you regardless of what's happening around?
Yeah, you know, I see life as, I see these key moments of my life as these challenges that have forced me to discover who I am on the deepest soul level. And I don't know if you know this, but because it's kind of new information, but I'm in grad school right now studying psychology. And in psychology, there's this concept of individuation. And there's like, you know, many different definitions of individuation, but like my understanding of it is that it's this process of kind of like rubbing up against challenges in life, whether that's a relationship or bullying or sexual identity or some sort of systemic trauma that you've had to endure. But life kind of will rub up against you and force you to discover who you truly are at your essence.
Yeah, traditionally,
And
individuation is a thing all of us have to go through in our teenage to young adulthood years when we realize, oh, wait, my parents are not gods. They're not perfect. I'm not them. I can
yep.
believe things differently than they do. I can have different perspectives on the world. I can disagree with them and still be a whole person. And I would
Mm-hmm.
actually argue that it's during this process of individuation that a lot of us really struggle because nobody's really given us permission. We sort of have to take permission to separate out from that made us.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And like, so in my journey of individuation, or in discovering my truth, like my independence, my autonomy, my agency, my Shannonness, I think about being bullied in Catholic school. Um, that was when I look back on bullying, it has shadow and light. It has a blessing and a curse. Obviously, it sucked to be called FAGGOT and gay, and Shannon's a girl's name, and to be pushed around in the bathroom. Like, I wouldn't wish that upon anyone. But if you're listening and you've been the target of bullying, um, then you might know that experience of like when the world is trying to tell you who you are. I think about women, the way society tells women how to be from such a young age. There's all of these images and messages. This is how women should be. Messages that are delivered unconsciously to people of color. When the world tells you who you are and how you should act according to your physical identity or the way that you show up in the world. I know for me, it forced me to get really clear about, no, I'm not that. I'm not who you say I am. And it almost forced me deeper inward to connect to that truth within myself. That this also happened again with my parents' relationship, because they had a really intense relationship and I was kind of a mediator, unqualified therapist, parentified child navigating their miscommunications. It happened to me again when I was cheated on in my relationship and I was more invested in my partner's lies about what was happening than listening to the felt sense in my body, knowing my body knew something was up. My brain couldn't find it. I trusted his truth, which was a lie, more than I trusted myself. So I kind of name these experiences because there's not just one, it's all of these moments of self-betrayal, or whether it's self-betrayal or someone outside me betraying me, or both, that forced me inward to say, who am I?
Yeah. And the biggest part of what I'm hearing is the biggest part of the betrayal is just not listening to that internal voice, right? It's saying that internal intuition I have, the voice from inside that is telling me, hey, this is not the right choice for you, or something is wrong here, or don't give these people power, whatever that is. There's almost an active choice. I would argue most of the time it's probably not exactly an active choice, but you have to figure out a way to repress that internalized voice to go do whatever it is you choose to do out in the world. So if you're being bullied, you either retreat or you pretend to be what the other people need you to be. You sublimate your own needs so that you don't stick out too much and make too much of a fuss. Or in the context of a relationship, as you mentioned, you don't pay attention to the inner signal, and you quiet it down. And I love that you're bringing this up, because I would argue almost all my work is getting people to reconnect to that inner voice, because they worked so hard to repress it through drinking, drug use, porn, whatever it is that they needed to distract themselves and numb the original pain.
Yeah, it's that vulnerability of being human, that we're so vulnerable, we're so raw, and so we kind of grip around these coping mechanisms or attach to these numbing tools in order to because we aren't taught that emotional intelligence of how to feel and express our emotions. And a big part of the book is distinguishing between the mind's knowing, the cognitive knowing, and the body's knowing, the experiential knowing. And what does it look like and feel like? I say in the book too, to let your heart be on the passenger side of your best friend's ride. Referencing that old no scrub song. I don't want no scrub. A scrub is a guy who can get no love from me. Riding on the passenger side of your best friend's ride, trying to holler at me. So what is it like to let your heart be the driver and to let your mind be on the passenger side of your best friend's ride? I know for me that's scary because we cling to logic.
Yeah.
And cognitive knowing is important. But what is it like to let the body lead, to let the heart lead, to lean into that knowing instead of having to have it all kind of sorted and to have the proof all laid out before we can lean in and take a risk or follow our hearts or trust our gut.
Yeah, especially because it's a lot easier to lie to yourself with words than with feelings.
Oh yeah.
Like I can excuse away, I can feel like shit and give myself reasons why I should be feeling like shit. But it's a lot harder to feel like shit and go do whatever it is that will change that feeling. It's my body will tell me pretty quickly, is that working or not? And it's going to be very difficult for me to lie, which again, I think speaks really highly to the reason why people turn to alcohol or drugs. I'm stressed out. In order to get less stressed out, I have to do something in my life to reduce my stress. Or I could just have 4 shots. Four
Yep.
shots of
Yep.
alcohol, I will feel less stress without having to do all the hard work that it required to actually reduce the stress in my life.
Yeah, I've had those moments, and it feels like intense to say this out loud. I I've never been suicidal to the point where I'm like considering taking my life, but I've had moments of such uh, despair, stress, and overwhelm that I felt a sense of understanding. I get why people just say fuck it, fuck
Yeah.
this,
Or
and
or at
we.
least
Mhm.
or at least the feeling of like, you know what? If I didn't wake up tomorrow, it wouldn't be that bad.
Yep.
Like I think
Yeah.
that's something a lot of people can relate to when it just gets so hard and
Hmm.
you go, look, I'm not gonna kill myself, but shit, like if something happened while I was asleep and it just took me without pain, I just didn't wake up tomorrow, I'm okay with that, right? And that's a scary place to be in because part of what you're saying is I'm in pain. I don't know how to get out of it. I'm feeling hopeless and helpless. My inside, that gut, the truth, the inner sense that you have is telling me something is off. But I understand that it's a big lift. There's gonna be something massive that I'm gonna have to do to shift this. And you talk about times where we betray ourselves or times where we don't make the right choice. That voice comes and speak to us. We have to embrace it, right? We have to in our in the ignited work we talk about radical acceptance. Like you can't run
Mm.
away from your shadow. You just can't. Just
No, or it will run for you.
yeah. So you talk about the way you talk about it is embracing our shadow. Talk more about that.
Yeah, the shadow, there's kind of multiple ways that I've interacted with the shadow. The sort of more superficial way that I've interacted with the shadow is like thinking of it as the bad stuff, the stuff that I don't want to deal with, the rage, the anger, the grief, the betrayal, the disgust, all of those shadow emotions that are the ones that societally we've been taught, and also in the body just feel hard to feel, but we've been taught that they're wrong. We've been taught to just kind of shovel them away. Do not show that in public. Uh, so those are shadow emotions. But another definition or aspect of the shadow is just simply that which we do not see, that which I am unaware of, that which is in the unconscious space. And so to embrace the shadow is, first of all, it's like humbling to say, gosh, there's so much that I don't know. Why am I going to try and figure it all out today or feel this perfectionism of needing to understand how everything fits together?
That's a
It's
big
not
one.
possible.
I want to
Yeah.
stop there for a second. That's a really, really big one, right? You talked before about the heart versus the brain. And obviously those are symbols to everybody who's not clear on that. But like we want to have answers for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes when we don't, it's actually a well-known fact in the therapeutic world. And if that's kind of the path you're going on, if you ask somebody a question, they'll almost always give you an answer, even if they don't know the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And so, how are you feeling? Somebody they'll give you a word, they'll give you something. Um, but if you just kind of leave space for exploration, sometimes people realize that there are areas that they're curious about where they don't know the answer. And what I'm
Mm-hmm.
hearing you saying is, and I think this is true oftentimes for us, we don't necessarily know the source of those feelings. We don't know the source of those internal intuitions that are making us either feel uncomfortable or pushing us in directions that we don't know yet. And so sometimes the best you can do is get quiet and listen. And I'm not saying you're going to love all the answers you get, but again, that's our in Ignited we normally talk about honest exploration, right?
Yep.
Just release the need to be right, release the need to know, and just go in with curiosity and explore what's happening for me right now. Why is it happening? And kind of allow yourself to run around in that space without feeling like you have to have all the answers. I think that's a really insightful thing for a lot of people who feel like, well, I have to be able to explain this. You don't have to be able to explain this at all. You can just start with experiencing it.
I love that you slowed us down here and paused into this space here, because I think there's a really good example of this that I experienced with my therapist that kind of would paint exactly what you're saying. Uh, through something I went through. So to your point, a way that I avoid feeling is through my intellectual ability to kind of say things in a really beautiful way sometimes and over explain and over understand. I could go gab, 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 gab. I could just talk and avoid feeling by talking. So, of course, with my therapist, I can do that with him. Well, I'll talk about it. I'll explain it to you. I'll tell you where it all came from and why it all came out. I'll lay it out for you. And I had this thing coming up around the final manuscript of this book being submitted because there's a story I share about my dad and my mom, but I was more nervous about how my dad would respond to me naming some of his coping mechanisms growing up of drinking martinis and kind of being impatient and how that's connected to his father's physical abuse. And I was just so like, this was hitting a real deep pain point for me around fear of how my dad was going to feel reading these words. And I wanted to caretake. I wanted to imagine how he was going to feel, edit the book so that he would feel okay, and deliver to the world something that he would feel good about. And I had to get really clear, like, Shannon, this book is not for your dad. This is not his like 70th birthday party. This is not his funeral eulogy. This is a book for readers who are struggling with self-doubt, who've struggled with parent issues and growing up and life. And so I am feeling in my body so afraid to submit this final manuscript. I feel guilty and terrible and horrible that I'm going to hurt my dad. And my therapist finally gets me to slow down. And he says, can you just feel this right now? Can you just feel what is coming up in your body? And I close my eyes and I feel, and there's like just silence for a couple moments. And then he invites me to go back and he goes, can you go back as far as you can? It doesn't matter what comes up or what doesn't come up. Can you go back and see, like, where did you first feel this way? And of course I'm like, I'm feeling, and I don't really want to be feeling. That's why I've been avoiding it. But I have a memory just flash right in. And it's when I was maybe 7 or 8, my dad was selling his car and he was selling it to the brother of a family friend. The brother comes over to look at the car. It's parked across the street from our house in a parking lot. And I asked my dad if I can go with him and the other guy to go see the car. And my dad said I could come across the street. And I feel so proud that I'm going with my dad to like sell the car. Like I feel like such an adult. And my dad's telling the guy all about the car. And I say, hey, Dad, should you tell him about how the car shuts down sometimes and when we're driving it? Thinking like, oh, I know a thing that like should be said. And my dad gets so mad at me. And he grabs my hand and he walks me to the edge of the street and he kind of like, aggressively sends me back to the house. I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't felt that. And I realized that what was coming up in my body in the book, I'm saying a thing that feels true to me. And I'm worried that my dad is going to get mad, fling me across the street, and I'm going to be all alone and confused, not understanding what I did wrong. And so I share this in hopes that like I would have never, ever, ever connected that all the way back decades to that kind of lodged feeling in my body had I not, been working with a therapist to invite me to shut the fuck up and feel and then explore where is that feeling coming from. And it's not always such a flash of memory like that, but these are the insights that live in us when we have the courage to listen.
I love the power of stories because I think too often we get locked away in explanations. And explanations are devoid of feeling, as you pointed out. That's kind of why they're great for those of us who would rather avoid the discomfort. But I could feel the awkwardness of that moment for a kid and the whiplash, the emotional whiplash of like, I'm so happy and proud. Oh shit, I fucked up. Right. And like, in a matter of minutes and go from my dad's proud of me to my dad's disappointed in me. And even though I never experienced that story, you tell the story and everybody right away understands, and you get to connect to why it is so scary to disappoint your dad. Um,
Yep.
and so I love the power of stories, early childhood stories, especially to just get us to understand, hey, this is how I learned to navigate the world. From that moment, I learned to never say anything around my dad that he may take offense to. Now, here's the problem with that. I don't know what my dad may take offense to because you didn't think he would take offense to that piece. You were just sharing a fact, a true fact,
Mm-hmm.
which now means there's now this after effect in your brain always. Whenever you're around your dad and something is important, you're censoring yourself. Oh, don't say that. Don't think that. Don't look like that. And all of a sudden, your relationship around your father changes because of that moment in a very implicit way that you didn't realize, you didn't recognize, you didn't know.
Yeah, let me keep that from happening ever again. Let me take control and stop that from ever happening. And that's the coping mechanism. And so to have compassion for where that was coming from. I think oftentimes we're like, I don't want to look back that far. How could something from decades ago be affecting me now? Are you kidding? Like that's what the mind says.
It's all affecting all of us always, constantly. You and I have talked about this before. Bruce Lipton, I think you know some of his work as well.
Mm-hmm.
Bruce Lipton. There are a lot of other practitioners in this context, right? But one of the things that he talks about is really like your brain figures out. He says till 7. I think it can go a little bit later too, but it's early childhood is when your brain figures out how the world works. And unless you then go in and overwrite those rules, the old scripts, unless you go and actively overwrite them, your brain will keep functioning that way forever. It'll never stop.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I have to say that like the amount of compassion that I was able to that was able to flood into my system for myself because I started to interact with that 7-year-old that went through that experience and I was able to see that my nervous system was responding in that same exact way. It's like the medicine is the compassion of like, oh, I'm going to be really gentle with myself now because we're dealing with something really tender here. Uh, and that aspect has been really healing too, to like to
Mhm.
rewire the way I show up when I feel that way.
Yeah, and there's a magic in it the moment you realize this truth because you realize everybody else is doing the same thing.
Right.
And so while we're here trying to figure out what the hell, like why is it, I'll talk about something that's going on for me right now. Like, why is it that while I'm struggling to figure out how to grow Ignited and grow what we're doing, and I'm coming up against roadblocks, and I'm kind of like, I feel like I'm hitting my head against the wall trying to solve these problems. Why do I get so frustrated? Why do I feel like a failure? Like, why does that happen? I can rationalize it, or I can go, where is this coming from? What's the origin, right? Oh, when I wasn't perfect around my dad around academics, when I didn't get the right grade or I didn't do the right thing at school, I I heard it, right? I learned that that was a signal that I'm not good enough. So
Mm-hmm.
now when I go through these challenges, even though I can just talk about it as a challenge, what it feels like internally is, oh, here's another signal that I'm just not good enough for this. And
Mm.
that's the story that has happened repeatedly for me. And so when Shannon reacts, when Sophie, my wife, reacts, when one of my friends react, and I'm trying to figure out why that is, I need to just recognize they have patterns from their old experiences growing up that make that reaction, that experience they've shown me, the behavior that they're displaying right now, make the most sense in the world because that's how they learn you're supposed to behave in those situations.
Mm. And do you feel like that helps you disentangle from their experience so you can have yours without their reaction meaning something about your performance
Um,
or
You know,
your
the sad
enoughness.
truth, and I think anybody in the psychological field will agree with this to some extent at least. It's a lot easier to do when you put your professional hat on
Hmm.
than it is in your personal life.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like my orientation is different. If my wife is mad at me, I have a much harder time saying, hey, she's reacting to something that's activated in her based on old patterns than to just become defensive and weird about her attacking me.
Yeah.
That's my work there. Um, in a professional field, I think that's what makes me successful professionally is I can look at somebody and not judge them for their reactions, but rather help them understand what's under the surface.
Yeah. It's like it reminds me of like just the part of why therapy is so effective are the limitations of the therapeutic relationship and the container and the 50 minutes and the beginning and the end and the kind of rules around it. But when we deal with intimate relationships, it's kind of like the wild, wild west.
Yeah, and there's so many for each of us with each of our the people that are close to us, there are so many entanglements and so many triggers and cues and activations that we've experienced with them
Mm.
that
Hmm.
now when they say something, even though it may have an origin in an outside relationship than ours, it also activates patterns within our own relationship. And so now not only do we have to recognize where it's coming from for them, we also have to deactivate, reset, um, disconnect from our own activation patterns to them and from our past, right? So, like, we have to be playing it on two or three different fields. When a client is sitting on my couch, I don't have a connection to their personal life in a way where their decisions on my couch affect me. And so I get to only be looking ahead. And I think there's a real value in that. The moment you get enmeshed with a client, it becomes harder. And you start, I think, unfortunately, you then that's why in the psychological field, it's so much about avoiding dual relationships.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
moment you have another level of interest in a client, you lose the ability to make it all about their needs in the moment.
Right. Yeah. It's because it's such a unique relationship
It is.
where it's all about the energy and presence and life and content of the other person.
Yeah.
And then you step into when you were talking about the relationship, it made like the relationship with a significant other or intimate relationships. It's like there's the third relationship of the we. There's like Adi, there's Sophie, and then there's like the the third aspect of your relationship where you meet.
100%. And if you think about families, like think about the complexity of a family, right?
Oh my gosh.
Each parent has their own story. Then there's the we. Then there's the children, but there's probably the relationship to each child. Then there's each parent's relationship with their own nuclear family and the other person's nuclear. Like it's like this web that you're constantly having to navigate, and it's no wonder we get stuck sometimes. And so when we talk
Yeah.
about here's to me this the biggest value we can give people oftentimes is in talking
Mm,
about when things get hard. So you talk about something called sacred rage in
mm,
the book.
mm.
Rage is not something a lot of people are comfortable with, either receiving or expressing. I'm one of them, by the way. What do you mean by sacred rage?
So, one of the reasons I talked about rage in the book, other than it's something I have intimately had to deal with, is that I do also feel like rage is one of those emotions. I call it rage like New York City. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. It's like the top of the food chain kind of thing.
No doubt.
And what's made rage sacred to me is that if I'm becoming enraged, then that to me is like an alarm. And it could mean many things, but for me, I feel like my rage communicates to me one of two things. One, that there is like deep trauma in the body, like something that needs to come out that has been repressed or suppressed in my life. And it's just this heat, it's this fire, and fire needs a place to exhaust itself. And this might be intergenerational. I had a pretty strong connection to my dad's dad, my grandfather, through the writing of this book that um, helped me to see that my rage is a connection to this Irish, Catholic, toxic, patriarchal system of maleness that resulted in, my dad's dad immigrated from Ireland. He never graduated sixth grade. He didn't have even a basic education, really. He lived in Pennsylvania outside Philadelphia, hauling oil barrels, and he was a janitor. And all of my dad's brothers and sisters, all older than him, got the belt. They got the belt. They got beaten with the belt when they misbehaved. My dad got spared because he was the youngest, but he still grew up in that energy. So when I adopted a puppy soon after my breakup, I experienced being a dad, being a parent to this precious puppy. And when she would pee on the floor or vomit on the couch or do kind of, puppy things like chew a coffee table book, I would get so angry. I would get so mad. And there were a couple of times where my anger became so furious that I was like hovering over her. She was like cowering in the corner of the room, and I could see her afraid of me. And I looked back into her eyes and I was afraid of myself. And I hated myself for making her afraid of me and for feeling like this bad, evil villain, this abusive parent. And so I had to really deal with that because I was like, this is not okay. I refuse to be abusive to this puppy, but this anger, this rage needs an outlet. And so the question really came up for me is, and this is the second reason that rage can come up, is that it can be trauma related, but it also could be that we're betraying ourselves in some way. We're out of alignment with what is for our highest good and what's in alignment with our true nature. And so for me with Ginger, it was both. It was me dealing with my intergenerational parent dad stuff, but it was also that I was not ready for a puppy. I was going through a breakup. I was new to Los Angeles. I was living alone. I was getting my bearings, and I had no business taking care of another being like that at that time in my life when I needed to be learning how to take care of myself.
Mm.
And so the question that comes up for, and I ask this to everyone listening, when you deal with rage and if you deal with rage, is like, how can you express it in a way that's not harmful to yourself or others? If you suppress it, it's going to build up and come out stronger at a future date. So it's this power. Rage has this vibration, and it has information and intelligence and wisdom. For me, if I need to, I will grab a pillow and I will beat the fuck out of that couch, because that is a healthy way for me to release the energy. Or I'll work out, or I'll furiously journal. I will do something to move the energy, but I will not judge it. This is what I used to do. I used to judge it and shame it and shovel it so deep inside of me that it would come up stronger in the future, which
Yeah.
was harmful.
Yeah. Life
Right.
is so interesting because when you make that realization, oh shit, I'm not healthy enough, or I'm not in a position to take care of another life, and I don't have the tools, and I haven't learned how to deal with this rage. So like this combination. The interesting thing about life is sometimes your options are limited. And so in terms of what you can and can't do, and I think that's a really
Mm.
that's the difference between maybe being a child and being an adult, right? As an adult, your actions not only have consequences, but if we're honest about it, you're the one to bear the brunt of those consequences. When you're a child, there are other people to deflect to take care of some of your needs, to transfer responsibility onto, right, et cetera. But I think that's the mark of an adult is, oh shit, like I made a mistake and I have to handle it. And even when you realize you made a mistake that involves another being, we don't have a time machine. You can't reverse things. And I'm not saying there are not other choices you could have made, but oftentimes the decision that we have to make is, okay, these are the consequences. Here are my options. What am I going to commit to doing to make this situation better?
Exactly. I can't undo that. There's no undoing what just happened, but all the best that I can do is take responsibility for the energy that's moving through my body and my vessel, understand where is this coming from, and find ways to healthily express it so that I don't harm myself and others. And that's what comes up for me as soon as I feel rage. I'm like, okay, here it comes. How can I not hurt myself, and how can I not hurt others? If I can express it without doing those two things, then I'm in that sweet spot where I can yell, I can scream, I can do whatever needs to be done. But yeah, that's the adult piece, is I am responsible for this energy. I'm not going to offload this pain onto someone else.
Yeah.
That to me feels like the adult moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Now, I love all these pieces we talk about. Sometimes the things we have to deal with are are really painful and really final in some ways. You talk in the book on about your aunt, um, and her surrender and her ability to sort of let go, but still be part of something bigger than herself.
Mm.
Do you mind retelling that story a little bit?
Yeah, thank you for asking about my Aunt Bonnie. She was such a special woman. I just have to like her energy was so unique and so alive. She was alive. And she had this like auburn red short hair. She had four kids, my cousins, and tons of grandkids. And a couple months before she died, I was at her house because my big Irish family used to gather at their house, my aunt and my uncles, the Friday after Thanksgiving. And my dad plays guitar and sings Irish songs on guitar, and everyone drinks a little too much. Um, well, not everyone, but a lot of people do. And um, I remember she and I had some alone time the day after that big celebration, and she was kind of letting me know that her ovarian cancer wasn't getting better. Um, and she said to me, she said, Shannon, like, if God's ready to take me, I'm ready to go. If it's my time, I'm ready. I've been to all of my kids' weddings. I've held almost all of my grandkids, and I have lived a full life. If it's my time, I'm ready. And I was like so moved by that acceptance of her potential fate that I was like, wow, that is faith. That is surrender. And I a couple of months later, it was winter in New York, and I lived in this old pre-war apartment on the Upper West Side, fifth floor walk up. And this was like, several years ago when I was in my early 20s, and I took a hit of a joint because I had a day off from work, and I was kind of like, just chilling out. And I took a hot bath. I took a hit of this joint, go into a hot bath, and I just lay there. And something about the THC got me really still and really feeling what I was avoiding feeling. And I started sobbing in this hot tub. And I like shot up out of the hot tub, and I just heard this loud voice in my head that was like, you need to go see your Aunt Bonnie now. And I like texted my dad, and I was like, I gotta go. And I ended up not getting to her. I had to take the train from New York to Philadelphia, and I had to rearrange my whole work schedule. I was teaching yoga in New York at the time. It was a complicated rearrangement. And it took me exactly a full week to get to her bedside. And my cousin Ron picked me up at the train station. We stopped at Wawa for a coffee, and I walk upstairs and I walk into the bedroom. This is the house that she's lived in her whole adult life, raised all of her kids here. And I walk into the bedroom, and she's on hospice in the hospital bed. and her best friend, Mrs. Cassidy, is in the room. And I am just like in total tension. I can't believe my aunt looks so much more frail than she did when I saw her a few months prior. She is at the end of her life. And I'm just like, oh my God. And my cousin Ron had let me know that they had said goodbye to her the night before, and she hadn't spoken in over 24 hours. It was unlikely that she would, be back in a conscious space. And Mrs. Cassidy, my aunt's friend, says to me, talk to her, Shannon, talk to her. She can hear, talk to her. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I haven't even sat down yet in the room. And I just start flooding through my favorite memories of her. Remember this summer when I would come up here and stay for a week for camp, and we went putt putt and you took me to the Lion King? And remember when you came and saw me in Oklahoma and you were spinning around after the show and so proud. And as I'm going through these memories, she shoots up, she sits up in her hospice bed, and her eyes open and she goes, Shannon. And she grabs my hand, and she immediately falls back, into her bed. And I'm like, oh my God, I just killed my aunt. I literally am convinced that much energy coming from that body, I was like, she's done. And she holds my hand tightly for the next 10, 15, 20 minutes. And I keep going through the memories, and slowly her hand releases about 20 minutes in, and she dies that night. And the next day, her cousins, my cousins, her kids told me, the last thing she ever said was Shannon. And I just I just felt like such an honor, and that felt like a symbol to me of, this is a woman who lived fully, who had full faith, who trusted and surrendered and said, God has a plan for me. I'm ready to let go. And I just kind of took that as a symbol of like, Shannon, like carry forth this energy, carry forth this relationship to surrendering to source, to surrendering to something bigger than yourself. And so the first time I met Sean Korn several years later, I was in a yoga class up at Wanderlust Stratton, hundreds of yogis. And at the end of class, we're in meditation, and Sean's just downloading, praying like she does. I called her after that class a preacher poet goddess. And she's just like doing her slam poetry prayers. And I felt this tingle come up my spine during the prayer. And I felt I felt my crown chakra like tingles in my skull. And I just felt the presence of my aunt behind me. And I knew that, that was just a holy moment of synchronicity and connection, and feeling the vibration of higher power.
Mm.
And so, yeah, that I share that story because I think all of us struggle with surrendering and connecting to something bigger than us. And there's something about death that invites us to have some sort of intimacy with that transition from this life to the next, or from this moment to the next.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think I love that story, and thank you for sharing it.
Thank you for
Yeah.
allowing me to share it.
Yeah, I think like when we started out today, right? Sometimes we try to create logical explanations for things that are just outside of that.
Mm.
Um and at times you just have to honor the, whatever you want to call it, spirit, soul, God, source, universe, whatever you want. Really, it doesn't matter to me what word you give it. Um, I always talk about how I have a weird aversion to the word God. I born in Israel, grew up around religion, just I have a thing about it. But I've realized since it doesn't matter what I call the universe and the powers that exist within it, right? It's we're talking about something similar. And sometimes we just have to honor and respect that.
Yeah, and in that chapter, I actually intentionally, I couldn't decide what to call the universe, source, God, goddess, higher power, infinite. I couldn't, and I didn't want to choose a name,
Yeah.
because to like label it feels like to make
To
it
limit it, yeah.
smaller. So I actually, in that chapter, I just, every time I say it, I switch to a different one
That's awesome.
in hopes that the reader will, maybe find what
The
feels
one that
best
speaks to
for
them.
them. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if that doesn't speak to trust your truth, I don't know what does, right? You get to find your own word, you get to find your own intuitive connection to that thing, whatever you want to call it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad that we got to have this conversation, Shannon, and I know a lot of people will feel empowered by it. And obviously you guys can go to trustyourtruthbook.com to get the book. Um, Anything else, like if somebody wants to connect with you, uh, you know, work with you, do anything else, tell our people where do they find Shannon?
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to say thank you to you, Adi. I love talking to you, and it's so amazing, seeing where different conversations about this book go. And I just want to thank you for having the capacity and the patience and the grace and the spaciousness to allow some of these deeper stories from the book to come through. It doesn't happen in every space, in every interview. And
Thank you.
just thank you for the way that you continually show up to be of service to so many people who are looking for connection to a healing path for themselves.
Thank you.
um yeah, you're just amazing. And yeah, the book trustyourtruthbook.com is a great place to go to start if you want to get a copy of the book. It would obviously mean the world to me if you were to hold this book in your hands. Oh my gosh. And I'm Shannon Algeo, or Shannon.Algeo, Algeo on Instagram, and shannonalgeo.com is my website. There's also at trustyourtruthbook.com a meditation for each chapter, because each chapter is in alignment with the chakras. So, and there's a couple of other bonus gifts in there also for anyone who gets
Amazing.
the book.
I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. As usual, I'll ask all of you who are tuning in right now, just screenshot whatever you're listening to this on and tag Shannon.Algeo on Instagram, tag me, tag ignited.me, and let us know what resonated the most. Like, what was your takeaway from this? I always find, almost like group therapy, I always find that when you share your lesson, somebody else goes, "Oh my God, I didn't even listen to that part. Or I didn't hear it that way." And then they get to, share in that lesson, share in the truth that you put out into the world. So thank you all for listening. Thank you so much, Shannon, for being here. Have a great week and see you next week. Bye. Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you. So please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.